I'm speaking in this plenary in representation of the Council of the European Union in order to explain to you that since, together with the Commission, the High Representative, we set out a new set of general and personal sanctions. Co-repair and our ambassadors have been working hard on this. Last night they were working, and the meeting is continuing this morning, and I trust that before the end of this plenary sitting we will have reached an agreement within the Council and the adoption of the joint proposal put forward by the Commission, and I've no doubt that the President will give you the details. I'd like to thank the President of the Commission and my colleagues for the efforts and the leadership they've shown in continuing to come forward with proposals and debating proposals for sectoral sanctions together with the targeted personal sanctions. This should further constrain Russia's export capacity and the relations its industry can continue to carry out, particularly the technological sector, linked to the war. In August of last year, we were importing 12 billion cubic litres, only 4 this year. We've cut our imports from Russia to a third of what they were. Over the last 36 weeks, we've reduced imports by 54 billion cubic meters. That's going to allow us to reduce our energy dependency on Russia, which severely constrained our foreign policy towards Russia, and as a result of that, an impact on our foreign policy, including Ukraine. We needed a foreign policy towards Ukraine. It had been subject to our policy with Russia, and that in turn had been subject to our energy dependency. But now we have a clear policy towards Ukraine, informed by our will to ensure that Ukraine go on to join the European Union. There's a clear goal behind this policy. This will become possible because we will no longer be so dependent on Russia. There's good news on the battlefield for Ukraine in the war. Ukraine is going back onto the offensive. The war has entered a new phase. It's undoubtedly a dangerous phase because we're in a terrible scenario now. We mustn't cut our eyes to this. There's a scenario of a conventional war involving a nuclear power which is currently retreating from the conventional theatre, but threatening to deploy nuclear weapons. This scenario is undoubtedly a source of concern, and we have to show that our support for Ukraine is not weakening. Ukraine is making progress on 3 fronts: in the Donbass, having retaken Liman, and the centre and the south of Zaporizhia, advancing towards Mariupol, and lastly in Kherson. Russia still has numerical superiority, and it still has superior firepower. And that's why Ukrainian forces are using extremely agile tactics. They're using very powerful intelligence, surrounding concentrations of Russian power, creating pockets which are then destroyed as the Russian army itself withdraws. This allows the Ukrainian forces to keep their losses lower than they would have been and score successes that no one would earlier have forecast. The situation for us is extremely perilous. Russian soldiers, for one thing, don't actually know the purpose of this war. The 300,000 men who are going to be taken from their homes and sent to the front will understand it even less. So you can win a war on the battlefield, but first and foremost you have to win it on the battlefield of ideas, because behind the war as such. There's war as a struggle for supremacy of values. Russia is fighting hard around the world to make the case that the consequences of this war are actually the result of our sanctions against Russia. We have to fight that battle in talks with our colleagues all around the world. We must continue to isolate Russia. A very important international body, the ICAO, I met recently. And we need to keep up this effort consistently because there are a lot of strong feelings around the world regarding the causes of this war and, above all, its consequences. For many countries, the consequences of the war are undoubtedly bad ones, increasing energy and food costs. We have to make a strong commitment to the rest of the world to provide them with assistance to help them overcome the impact of this war. We'll have to make a huge diplomatic effort to explain the case so that the world will understand why it is that this war is coming about and how it may end. It cannot end because the Western world, becomes exhausted. That's what Putin is hoping will happen. He thinks that democracies are weak, that systems of public opinion, he thinks, want to put up with a Cold War. He's waiting for General Winter to come along, which has always helped Russia win previous conflicts. He's hoping that the cold and the cut in gas supplies and high energy prices and low temperatures will undermine our will to continue our support to Ukraine. And this is the place where I have to ask Europeans to understand what's going on. Our support for Ukraine isn't just a question of generosity. Our support for Ukraine has to remain total because Ukraine's fate is intimately bound up with our own. What happens there entails our future too. Yes, honourable members, decisions there determine our future too. And that's why it's so important to ensure that, just as others have done in Europe, foregoing our previous imperial ambitions, Russia also needs to give up its imperial ambitions. We need to work in a way to ensure that there's peace, and that means that Ukraine must recover its territorial integrity and its full sovereignty. Russia must shoulder its political and moral responsibilities in the war, must pay for the reconstruction, and those responsible for crimes against humanity committed there must be brought to account. That must be our goal. And so we have our sanctions, and we're providing our military assistance, and we're taking diplomatic action. On those three fronts, we must continue to redouble our efforts unflaggingly. This is not the time for doubt. European society must be able to keep up this struggle, supporting Ukraine using the procedures we have available to us. The President of the Commission today will be presenting the details of the sanctions package that the Council will be adopting, but above and beyond specific sanctions, the really important thing is for Europeans to grasp that if there's a price to be paid, that price is worth it, because if we don't pay this price, we will end up paying a much higher price later. This is a battle for freedom, for Ukrainians, but also for our freedom. And the effort we have to make will be written into history books as a point in history where a united Europe proved able to resist the aggression of a radically different political organisation from our own. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the High Representative. Next, I give the floor, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, please.